AI Realized, the podcast about everything that is new, now, and next for enterprise executives deploying AI. Hosted by myself, Christina Ellwood, and my collaborator, David Yakubovich.
Our guests will share what's driving AI adoption, use cases, and business models for the data and AI economy.
Why the future is bright. Why the future is bright.
Welcome to AI Realized, the podcast for enterprise executives deploying AI. From addressing security, data, and operations challenges to managing the organizational and management changes, AI deployment presents the opportunity to redesign our organizations from the inside out. I'm Christina Ellwood, your host for today's episode, and we're talking today with Randy Friedman, the Chief Commercial Officer of Cognizer AI. Welcome, Randy.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing on this
Yeah.
very early 2025 date?
Yeah, very busy, but good. Thank you.
Good. We were talking earlier about using AI to build AI. How are you using AI to build AI for your customers at Cognizer?
It's an interesting question. There's been a continuum of technology development. There's a lot of interesting things that have come up over the last couple of years. In the beginning, what we would do is we would create models. In our case, we apply AI to legal business processes. Our specialty at Cognizer is contract intelligence, taking contract documents, extracting intelligence from that, data extraction, structuring, graphing, insights, and analytics to help organization better understand their commercial relationships, obligations, revenue opportunities, things like that. Every company has somewhat different data space. If you think of a set of millions of contracts a large organization may have, you can think of that as a data type, the contract, and the aggregation of all that as a data space. And no two companies are the same. That means that they're going to need some kind of intelligence to resolve their own contract data space. It's going to be unique, and they need some kind of modeling to do that. Large language models provide some of that, but not all of that. And so the conventional approach had been that you would train models with training sets and then aim those models at this problem. And that's evolved to using some large language models and then generating prompts and prompting those large models to give answers. The next generation of that, called it Gen 2 of large language models, is using agentic flows. So instead of prompting the large language model, you create a team of agents and give them assignments, and those assignments really almost an anthropomorphic personality to those particular agents. They go about doing their work and they create the AI that is doing this work for you. They become the AI that builds the AI. We've created some application technology that allows a customer to describe the legal context and legal concepts that they're interested in capturing, not the words, but the meaning, what they're looking for, and what they're trying to understand from their giant contract data space. And then the AI builds the models necessary to do that kind of extraction on their behalf. And all of that is automated. But that's using just their own contract data to begin with. So they're focused on their own needs. Now, through mergers and things of this nature, now they start to deal with other organizational data, and it becomes really tricky because you can only really train models, even with agentic flows, on data that you control. And the next step is in working with data that you don't possess as an organization but need. You can think of that as like an ecosystem where you're working in an ecosystem, and to optimize your process, you need data from your ecosystem partners as well. That's a little bit beyond what we're working with right now at Cognizer, but I can absolutely see how that would work. When you think about the companies you do contracting with, those are in your supply chain, your value chain, and eventually you're going to get deeply embedded inside of those organizations from a data and AI point of view. And that's what I think is the next horizon in all of this work.
So let me just make sure I understand what you're saying here. You're saying that if I need to be able to use data from another organization, like I've got hundreds, thousands of ecosystem partners in my supply chain, for example, and in the case of Cognizer, I have contracts with all of them, but there's other data associated with it that's not contract related. I don't know, like forecasting data or stuff like that. If I need to be able to use that data, or more accurately, from what I gather, if I need my agent to be able to use that data, then I have to have some way for those agents to use that data and comply with all of the privacy and so forth requirements that are
Yeah,
in place. Is that what
yeah,
you're saying?
you're tapping into the right theme. So here's an example. Let's start at the top. I have a commercial relationship with a supplier. I'm a manufacturer, and my commercial relationship is codified in a contract. And the contract has provisions in it that says that you, as my supplier, have to provide me a certain level of quality, a certain level of a cadence of delivery, availability. We have possibly a return or an inspection process, all of these things that the contract describes. So analyzing that contract is one thing, and then enforcing that contract is the second thing. So you think about the natural extension of what a contract is. It's an agreement to do things in a certain way. The extension is you want to do those things in that way. How will you do that? Right now, it's some periodic report. Maybe every month I get a spreadsheet or some kind of a report from you telling me how things are going. Dig deeper. Now we want to make this dynamic. We want to optimize this process. We want to do it in real time. I don't want to rely on a piece of paper and a spreadsheet or a report to do this work. It's too slow. I can't optimize. So now I have to get inside your perimeter, your security perimeter, and gain access to some data that's describing, that's what that report was made up of, but not in a fixed static report form, but in a dynamic flow. I want to be able to actually optimize my demand forecasting and my own production and sales forecasting around what you're doing, and now multiply that by 10 because I have 10 suppliers and I have to do that with everybody. So if you think about a contract very dynamically, a contract is just a way in which you've agreed to do something. And then what you want to be able to do is monitor that. You monitor right now, it's a very slow, static approach. AI makes this possible to do it really dynamically, and I wouldn't say in real time, but continuously. So the faster, the more accelerated the opportunity you're seeking is, then the faster you want that cadence to go. AI makes this possible. Think about fax machines was how we delivered information, and then it became a spreadsheet that we'd email, and then it's an Airtable that we're both working on, and then it's a ERP that we have sensing. This is just a natural continuation of all of that. And that's what's interesting, is that the perimeters are becoming permeable to these organizations, and you can imagine the AI has to flow across these organizations in order to really deliver the value people are seeking.
So is that like an agentic workflow API?
Yeah, it's a good question. At a high level, it's like an embedded worker. If you think about this agent as a worker, or there's a team of workers, what you really want to do is allow them to be embedded inside your organization. You don't want them to be able to run amok and do anything, right? You need to control them. And they need data to do their job. So you have to make sure that data is available, but not necessarily visible or useful in any way other than its intended purpose. So if we're doing business together as ecosystem partners, if you visualize a Venn diagram, that gray area is getting bigger and bigger, right? That's what this technology really can do. And if you think about, for example, not supply chain, but healthcare, there's a patient. They're seen by multiple doctors in different facilities with different systems, but you need a continuum of care and a care plan. That patient is at the center of all of that. How's that going to happen? Or in pharma with drug discovery, same set of patients being examined for many different kinds of potential cures and therapies in different clinics, but those clinics are a part of many different clinical trials. The efficacy of all of that work would be so much higher if there was a way for this agentic embedded workers uh, to actually gain access to the information they need to do their work. So there's this big continuum. It's gone from I'm going to produce a lot of training data to train a model to then now I have a large language model that I'm prompting. I can do RAG based type of questions with my own content. And now I realize to do my job and really to accomplish my goal that's in that original contract, I actually have to do agentic analysis across multiple data sets, not all of which I have permission to or create. They may not be part of my business, they may be part of my partner's business. And that's the direction things are headed.
So that sounds like a different infrastructure for the data, that there has to be a way that this data that is resides in multiple companies in the system that you're describing, whether that's clinical trial data or whatever, that those multiple parties need to be able to allow these agents to do their work in order to provide the value of the insight. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a great question. The data infrastructure that's in use today is principally organization centric. There is an administrator. That administrator sets up the environment. You can delegate different rules to different users and different access, but they're not really designed around cross organizational engagement. They're around single organizational engagement. They sprang up from the conventional database from however many decades ago. And if you look at the concept of the blockchain, which was a totally different kind of structure, they had this decentralized idea where control was managed in a decentralized way through smart contracts. But problem is it just doesn't scale very well. The performance is really bad. But if you take those two concepts at a high level and put them together, you need something decentralized where the control of how data is used is exclusively managed by its owner, the organization, in a cross organizational framework. But the utilization of that data is not within that organization, it's across organizations or by partner organizations. So you definitely need a different kind of infrastructure to be able to do that. And the other thing is that the more rich these agentic activities are, the less tolerance they'll have for latency. So the more computationally complex, the closer you need to perform that work at the edge. And so this idea that you can bring all the data together and analyze it or put it in a room and analyze it, so to speak, that doesn't work when these things are really complex. And there's the third issue, of course, of trust, which is I have to secure this. I have fiduciary obligations, I have legal obligations, regulatory obligations to make sure this data is managed in the right way and governed in the right way, which is interesting because that means you can't have a centralized governance structure. You almost have to have a governance structure that works from the bottom up at the data level, not at the top down organizational level. Those kinds of things don't exist right now, but we can all see them coming and why that would be needed. To facilitate this kind of optimization where there's a lot of trapped value, there needs to be some new kind of fabric that connects organizations together in a secure, trustless way that allows these sort of embedded workers to do their job and do that in a manner that is controllable and federated and decentralized in its terms of entitlement to the data, right? So that one organization doesn't have to abide by the same rules as another organization. They get to control what and how and by whom or by what agent that data can be used at any point in time. And that's new. That's different.
It's a really fundamental change in how data can be used.
Yeah. You think about it right now, we operate in a somewhat of a double blind mechanism at Cognizer. We're being asked to help companies develop models and AI capabilities to understand their contract data space, but not ever see it. We're never allowed to see it. It's an interesting trick. So now, if you multiply that across multiple organizations, now that's we don't have a way to do that, and that's what we're talking about. You can tell why you would want to do it. People have been talking about this for a long time. There's just been no way to do it, and now with agentic architectures, that need is growing, right? And there's a lot of misuse of data. You can see the litigation involved in companies that have scraped data to train their models. We have people we know, both of us in our network, who've decided to put their models behind the firewall to really protect the data of their customers, but that provides some upper limits on what they can do. And so there's this tension between what you can imagine the technology could do versus what you want to govern it to satisfy any one of your customers, say. So that tension has to give rise to some new way of doing this that preserves privacy, preserves that differential privacy and that ability to do this decentralized control, and yet accomplish this lofty objective of really optimizing and improving the outcomes. Those two things don't go together with current technology.
But every time we have a big new technology available, in this case, AI, we also have the opportunity to re-architect how our existing systems are being used, not just in service of the new technology, but being used, period, right? Because there's that tension breeds innovation, but it also breeds the opportunity for us to make changes in our infrastructure. Infrastructure has a tendency to get pretty rigid over time, and these are the kinds of things that unlock that rigidity and give us a chance to have some new flexibility. And do you
Yeah,
think that is going to be driven from the business need down into the organization to say, hey, I need to be able to do these things with this with our data that I can't do today? Or do you think it's going to be something that happens from the technology outward, that, hey, the technology is being used for this purpose and its value is constrained by not having the right data access? Which way do you think that's going to work? Or maybe it's both.
yeah, it's a great question, and it's nicely phrased. Where's the chicken? What's the egg? How do those two things relate to each other? And speaking just colloquially, I think the answer is both. So on the one hand, you can think of the cloud as being a technical solution to a technical problem of scalability and redundancy and economy. People had databases that were on-prem, and having it in the cloud means that they don't have to maintain those on-prem instances and figure out how to double their capacities and things of this nature. So virtualization technology really helped in making this possible. And then people started to rethink everything, right? Once they understood that was something they could do, they took a step back and said, hey, I'd like to collaborate. I'd like to have more collaboration. I have been able to do that. The same virtualization technology, if I push it up to the application level now, my people can collaborate regardless of where they are. That's pretty cool. So collaboration was always a desired outcome, but there wasn't a method to do it. And the method to do things don't always match to the intention. Like we all know about drugs that were developed for one thing and turns out they're hugely beneficial for something else. And that's true with technology too. So the really forward-thinking operators, the enterprises that are thinking about their desired goal, let's say desired goal back to the supply chain example is I don't want to disrupt my business. I want to be able to have a smooth flow of goods. And I know there's lots of changing events in the world, and I want to be able to adapt to those. COVID taught a big lesson in that. They know they want to do that. And they're going to pull on that chain, and that's going to pull technology along in a direction that allows them to do that. And some of the things we're talking about are my imaginings of where that heads. And I think, yeah, you're going to see some reuse of technology that people didn't think was good for a particular purpose. And then all of a sudden, like that drug that all of a sudden helps your hair grow, it was for your blood pressure. There you go. Now people are going to use it in a new way.
The other way that it happens too, Randy, that we didn't mention yet is people invent new kinds of companies with these new technologies. And when you invent a new type of company, you represent the ability to do things in a way that weren't considered before. So if we were starting a company that we wanted to have, I'm going to be extreme and use Jeremiah Owing's prediction that you're going to build a company that has only one person, the founder, and everything else is done by an agent. If you
Mhm.
really did build something like that, you would have to have a way for those agents to be able to do what you're talking about. They'd have to be able to work with outside entities and use data outside the organization as well as inside the organization without ever having a human touch something. So if someone
Yes,
actually built a brand new type of company, then the need for some of these capabilities would not only become more clear, but it would be a competitive threat if you didn't have them.
absolutely. I think that's what the evolution of the technology will drive is new enterprises, new providers of technology. You can think of some of the work OpenAI is doing. They're taking their large language models and productizing them as workers, virtual workers that you can hire, pay them by the month, and they do a certain job. Yeah, you need a PhD in biochemistry. That PhD in biochemistry is going to have to work inside of some organization, right?
Possibly
And
more than one,
yes,
right?
massively more than one. And how will they do that? And how will they collaborate?
Which is a big part
So
of what you're talking about. That doing the job that you described with one other entity has one level of complexity, which you're dealing with every day. But when you need to do it with more than one entity, and there's a differential need for the use of the data and rules about accessibility and so forth, now you're talking about a whole nother level of complexity.
it's fantastic to think about. It's very inspiring. So going back to the legal use cases at Cognizer that we're focused on, although we are not doing it, there's a lot of application of agentic capabilities to negotiating contracts and understanding each party's best interest and having that agent represent that interest. You can think of those two agents are being on the outside of each of their security perimeters, but there's no gray in the Venn diagram. There are two lawyers and two companies doing this work. You just have agents facilitating that job. But when you take the next step, say it's not the contract itself, but the business activity described in the contract. Now I want to do that with you. Now we have to put the perimeters
Yeah,
overlapping and you get
yeah,
the gray area and then you get into this space
yeah.
that we're talking about that requires new infrastructure, new technology, new data structures, new security paradigms, and new collaboration paradigms. That's what's coming for sure.
Mhm. Wow, that's quite a future that you're painting, and I really appreciate that. What guidance do you have for the executives listening to our podcast today about getting ready for this kind of future or for learning more about the possibilities of this type of technology?
I actually think that people are thinking about this now. They've always been thinking about it. If you work in procurement, if you manage the supply chain, on the top of your head are things that relate to making that better, more performant, more efficacious, more observable, and more controllable. It's been on your mind for a while as a head of procurement or supply chain. And you work in an ecosystem that the data that's part of your work belongs to somebody else. And you try to figure out how in the heck in the world can you get that safely and protect it, or do so in a way that preserves a certain level of opacity, and you start to multiply these ideas. I think people are wondering about this, and then I think there will be innovative vendors who come along and go, "Yeah, I've rethought this whole process that you're in the middle of doing with a completely different paradigm that delivers this outcome you like. Would you like to give this a try?" And I think you'll find some of those companies, early innovators, embracing this and giving it a try, and that's where the change will come from.
Great. Any resources that you have to suggest for the listeners? The resources you might point them to?
And it's a good question. I do a lot of reading on Medium. There's a lot of interesting thought leaders on Medium where they're talking about agentic flows. Certainly, I follow a bunch of people who write blogs and make observations. One of them is a mutual friend of ours, Steve Jones at Capgemini, who talks a lot about these things.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in terms of what we're talking about, you can see the handwriting on the wall with what OpenAI is doing and what Microsoft is doing and what Google's doing. And I think everybody understands these things in a somewhat different way. It takes some thought and some imagination to figure out how you could apply that in a productive way. And overall, I think that's what I've been doing in terms of expanding my thinking and trying to create new ideas and figuring out what's next.
Great. As we wrap up, what would you like our listeners to take away from our conversation today?
Bell bottoms. Yeah.
Oh,
So
please
I,
no.
I mean that in a funny way. It used to be bell bottoms were very hip and then they went away. Nobody thought they were cool. And then they came back and all of a sudden they were interesting again. I think this is what's going to happen. That's happening now. Old concepts from old kinds of technology implementations are being reimagined and repurposed in new ways. A lot of what you're going to see next has been a repackaging of what was before, and with an extension, more power, more capability. Remarkably, there's a lot of older ideas that can be reused and repurposed in new ways, and I think that we're seeing that. And the other would be maybe anthropomorphizing a little bit more this technology. If you think about a company like Deloitte, we're very proud at Cognizer to have a good relationship with Deloitte. Deloitte has a few 100,000 people who work all over the world, and they work inside their enterprise customers' perimeters. They become part of their organizations. They become essentially embedded workers. Now, if you can anthropomorphize AI, and you're going to see the same pattern. How do you make that happen? How is all that going to happen? Once you have the question, you can begin to ask the critical deconstruction task of, okay, how would I make that happen? Once I understand that's a possibility, I think everybody starts to say, how do I unpack that into something that's actionable? And I think that's fascinating. I think that's what enterprise leaders should be doing. They should be asking these big questions. They have the template. They just need to apply it. It's like bell bottoms. Like, okay, we've had people doing embedded work for decades. Now, how would that be done with AI? It's an old idea, just rethinking it.
That's lots of good food for thought, Dan. Thank you so much, Randy Friedman, Chief Commercial Officer of Cognizer AI. Thank you so much for talking with me today on AI Realized.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Where the future is bright.